What is anxiety? Anxiety is an emotion that all humans experience, regardless of their age, race, gender, ethnicity, or culture. There are different forms of anxiety. These forms include panic disorders, social anxiety disorders, phobias, post-traumatic stress disorders, also known as PTSD, and generalized anxiety disorders, also known as GAD. We are going to discuss the demographics of anxiety, the biological, psychological, and social factors, the cultural and family factors, the ethical considerations, and the theoretical frameworks that deals with anxiety. So, I'll be going over the demographics of anxiety. According to Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety is one of the most common mental illness in the United States. It affects 40 million adults in the United States that are aged 18 or older, or you can say 18% of the population. There are several types of anxiety disorders. The first one is generalized anxiety disorder. This disorder affects 6.8 million adults, that is 3.1% of the United States population. Women are twice as likely to be affected compared to men. Next, we have the panic disorder. The panic disorder affects 6 million adults, that is 2.7% of the population. That brings us to the social anxiety disorder. The social anxiety disorder affects 15 million adults, which is 6.8% of the population. This type of disorder is equally common among men and women. This disorder usually begins around the age of 13. Next, we have Pacific phobias. Pacific phobias affects 19 million adults. That is 8.7% of the U.S. population. Women are twice as likely to be affected as men. The Pacific phobia typically starts in childhood. The median age is around 7 years old. Now that brings us to obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD. 2.2 million adults are affected by this disorder. That is 1% of the U.S. population. This disorder is equally common among men and women. The median age of people starts at the age of 19. 25% of cases usually occurs by the age of 14. 1/3 of adults that experience this disorder, they first experience symptoms in a childhood. That leads us to the last disorder, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD. 7.7 million adults are affected. That is 3.5% of the U.S. population. Women are more likely to be affected than men. Rape is the most likely trigger of people with PTSD. 65% of men and 45.9% of women who are raped will develop this disorder.
There are many things that biologically influence the severity or frequency of anxiety in young and middle adulthood. According to Dogen, anxiety tends to run in families. If a young adult's parents or grandparents have a history of anxiety, that child is more likely to have anxiety than a child whose parents do not have a history of anxiety. 3 neurotransmitter receptor systems are associated with anxiety disorder. Please excuse me if I pronounce these words incorrectly. GABA benzoxazepine receptor system, serotonergic system, and noradrenergic system. There are 2 important serotonergic systems in the brain, defensive and coping responses. A coping response will help an adult deal with threatening stimuli and not become anxious. A defensive response, however, will try to combat the stimuli and is more likely to cause feelings of anxiousness. Another finding shows that there is a decrease in the serotonin transporter binding in the midbrain, temporal lobes, and thalamus in people who have panic disorder. Dogen also suggests that stress and adverse stimulation increase the release of noradrenaline. An abnormal regulation of noradrenergic systems on anxiety disorder has been suggested. Anxiety emerges in young adults as a result of unconscious conflicts, especially sexual and aggressive. The things that most people push out of their heads actually does affect them no matter how hard they try to forget them. According to Sigmund Freud, anxiety occurs when defense mechanisms are overused. So once you condition yourself to a certain response to a stimulus too often, it is not effective anymore and causes uneasy feelings. A fun fact from Dogen: It has been found that most children who have a fear of being away from their mothers, which is labeled as social phobia, were actually just refusing to go to school. Behavioral theorists believe that anxiety is conditioned by fear of an environmental stimulus. They also conclude that anxiety attacks are conditioned responses to fearful stimuli. A child may be afraid of external factors, which causes phobias and anxieties, but not wanting to leave mom is not necessarily an environmental fear. Most common factors that increase chances of anxiety are social isolation, lack of support, unemployment, poverty, major adverse life events, abuse, and neglect in childhood. Social factors of anxiety are very outward influences. Depending on how people view or treat young and middle-aged adults controls their level of anxiety.
Factors that contribute to cultural anxiety in any social setting are cultural processes such as Americanization, discrimination, and individual characteristics. Immigrants go through remarkably high levels of social anxiety as they grow accustomed to American cultures and traditions. Other factors contributing to social anxiety are socio-economic status, generational status, perceived classism, and internalized racism. Chinese immigrants face high levels of anxiety when relating with Caucasian Americans. The level of cultural anxiety varies according to the adaptation degree of American cultures and traditions. The more Americanized immigrants experience lower levels of cultural anxiety compared to those who tend to stick to their native cultures and traditions. A quarter of students in universities across the nation is said to be diagnosed with anxiety. Self-evaluation of current health, relationship with the advisor, sex, exercise regime, religion, and time spent on the internet and reading are the factors found to trigger anxiety in students. Participants in the research on the significance of job anxiety in the working population were reported to have had a higher degree of anxiety associated with their occupation. According to the research, job-related anxiety is triggered by organizational structure, pressure from superiors, prolonged absenteeism, the fear of exploitation, competition among co-workers, and the fear of job-related accidents. Unemployed individuals tend to have higher job anxiety compared to those already in the workforce. As individuals transition into young and middle adulthood, they experience family-related anxiety. The family is among the major contributing factors of anxiety in young and middle adulthood. Some of these micro-level factors include the history of child abuse, pregnancy, and infertility. Adults with a history of child abuse and neglect experience higher levels of anxiety in their relationship compared to those raised in loving, caring, and protective environment. Women experience high levels of anxiety during the initial stages of pregnancy. However, the anxiety level decreases as they advance to post-delivery. Couples that have difficulties conceiving are reported to develop anxiety. The level of anxiety due to infertility is higher in women than men. This is because women think they are at fault.
It has been argued that in threatening situations, the brain shifts to focus on rapid defense mechanisms. Past actions causes people to be mindful of personal needs and ignore ethical and moral reasoning. Social workers should serve their clients by making sure they are competent about anxiety disorders and the effects it has on their clients. A person who is unemployed because they do not have proper coping mechanisms and cannot keep a job should be evaluated differently than a person with equal amounts of coping and defensive mechanisms. When social workers are dealing with clients that have anxiety, they should not judge this person. The social workers should respect the dignity and worth of the clients that they are dealing with. According to the Code of Ethics of the National Association of Social Workers, the main goal of social workers' career is to help those in need and address social problems. Social workers should enhance the client's capacity and opportunity to change and address their needs. We strive to strengthen relationships amongst people in efforts to restore and enhance individuals and families.
Hi, class. I'm Sheikah Freeman, and I'm going to be informing you on two theories that support the problem of anxiety. I chose Maslow's hierarchy of needs and then the systems theory because they both shed light on internal and external reasonings behind some of the causations of anxiety. So I'm going to start with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow explains how, as humans, we all have certain needs that need to be met in order for us to function properly throughout our development. He considers these needs to be self actualization needs, esteem needs, belongingness and love needs, safety needs, and then the physiological needs. He lists these needs from lower priority to higher priority into a pyramid. So, for example, the physiological needs are the most important needs. So, they would be at the bottom because they require the individual to have food, water, nutrients, oxygen, and rest. Then, the least important need would be the self actualization needs, which consist of self acceptance and morals and values. Our need for food and water is far more critical than our need for morals or values. However, these needs can be met in any order. Everyone's not going to follow the same path or direction as Maslow's theory. But if one of these needs are threatened or not obtained, it could result to one having anxiety or stress due to a lack of vital needs. Also, if a lower need is threatened, then a person will abandon a higher need. So, I'm going to use an example of a young boy who's very stressed regarding his exam. Because he's so stressed, he's lacking esteem needs in the sense of achievement. That void could cause him to feel stressed, nervous, and distracted during his exam constantly. And these emotions that he's feeling could cause him to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, but more specifically geared towards test anxiety. Now on to the systems theory, or more specifically, the family systems theory. In this theory, the family environment impacts the entire system, including the individual. Having stability within a home with healthy relationships has a big impact on the individual. For instance, if the home was stable, it could teach an individual about the importance of balance and security throughout life. And then on the other hand, if the home is not a solid environment where the child feels safe, then it could cause them to become insecure and nervous while developing stress, which soon results into anxiety. This theory explains how also the blurring of boundaries in a home between roles, such as mom and dad or sister and brother, could be problematic for an individual, referring back to how the stableness of a home affects development of a young or middle adult. Uh, the individual could easily take on stress and or anxiety if they don't feel safe or loved. Um, Both of these theories provide structure and direction when it comes to working with clients. Maslow's hierarchy of needs can assist social workers and clients with prioritizing their problems. The system theory allows the social worker to look into the client's interactions within their environment and then look into the client's behavior as the result of the environments that they were placed in. In conclusion, we have used Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the family systems theory to describe the problem of anxiety in middle and young adults. Anxiety disorders are most prevalent of psychiatric disorders, and research shows that women experience anxiety much more likely than men do. In order for an individual to function at their highest potential, their environment must be in a stable condition. When this does not happen, people grow to become depressed, stressed, and end up having anxiety. Social workers should ensure that they know their client's history and look into the systematic environments the client has previously and currently been placed in prior to them experiencing anxiety.